What's up, y'all, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I'm going to be ranking the European Imperial powers from 1914, which would have been the first year of World War One and kind of the golden age of imperialism. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. Now, you guys seemed to really like the last video I made, which was the video that was about what would World War One look like. And today I'm going to be doing something, kind of similar with the same website, which is MapChart, and that's a really good website. And this is a map of the world in 1914, which was the first year of World War One. And so I'm going to be ranking the nations from most powerful to least powerful, which a lot of these would be European nations, but however, not all of them are European nations. A lot of these imperial powers, which these European these imperial powers really aren't just necessarily ruling from Europe. Let's say from Europe and ruling another country, different continent. It could be just ruling a different people group. So that's kind of what I'll be considering. So the first most powerful nation, obviously, I think, is Britain. They controlled the seas and they held by far the most land out of any of the imperial powers, and their navy just, can be matched by anyone, not even Germany or France. So obviously Britain, India and South Asia, that was really their the crown jewel, really, of the British Empire, which makes sense. It's the center of where a lot of where most of their people actually were in their empire. And then another one of their territories that they would have Ceylon, this little island here. That's would have been another part of their territories in South Asia. And again, this is one of their biggest areas and most important areas of their empire. Egypt would have been another pretty important part of their empire, and some of their parts. These would have been some other parts in Africa: Anglo-Egyptian Sudan, British East Africa. Uganda technically would have been under British control. Rhodesia would have been British. Buchaland, I don't know how to pronounce that. Buchanan land, I think that's how you say it. And South Africa and the little nations inside would have all been under British control. And then also other places in Africa, they would have had Nigeria and the Gold Coast. They would have also had Sierra Leone, a little part there that they would have had. They would have had, British Somaliland. I mean, obviously that's kind of labeled. And I believe that's all of their territories in Africa, which is really a lot of territory, honestly. So let's see. Some more in Asia. They would have had. British would have had Manila. They would have also had Siam. And then they would have had Bonito and British New Guinea. That would have been the extent of their territories in Asia. Then they would have also had Guyana in South America. They've had that for a long time, the 1700s, and they've continued to hold that territory in South Africa, even though the whole Monroe Doctrine of no more Europeans being in the Western Hemisphere, the Europeans still had some territory there. They would and then that would be and then the areas that would have really been under a lot of British influence. I'll do that as a really kind of light red, but Canada would have been a heavy. Australia and New Zealand would have been under a lot of British influence. However, they were their own nations. They just, Canada was a little weird. Britain kind of had control of their government, but yet Canada was still kind of independent as well. Um, then Australia and New Zealand, they were they were had heavy influence by the British as well. So the next most powerful country, I believe, would be um, uh, Germany, which I'm going to use black. Germany was the big rising power and a rival to Britain at this point, and a rival to France as well, which I'm going to say is third. I'll spoil that for you. And Germany's imperial areas weren't really super impressive, definitely not like Britain. However, they were rising. Their industry was going very strong, almost as strong as Britain's economy. Their navy was really growing, almost very close to Germany's or Britain's. Sorry, and so Germany was a really pretty powerful nation, and their military was kind of state of the art. They used a lot of new tactics and stuff that many of the other European nations didn't catch on kind of later. That's why they're able to beat the French really pretty badly in the beginning of the war in 1814, which is the year this map is drawn. So some of the German territories in Africa, they would have had Cameroon, I think that's how you pronounce it, German Southwest Africa, and they would have also had German East Africa, and then they would have also had German New Guinea, which that's kind of the extent of their. And they had the Togoland. And that's pretty much the extent of the German Empire. They, again, like I said, their territorial holdings weren't super impressive. However, if they would have won World War I believe they would have expanded on that. They would have taken some British and French territories in Africa and would have really expanded their empire. So the next, like I said, I think is France. France has historically been a really powerful nation. They've always been rivaled against Britain and Spain in the 1600s. They've always had a really powerful nation. Obviously, Napoleon was almost able to capture all of Europe, and they've just been a historically very powerful nation. So some of their territorial holdings in Africa, French West Africa, this huge chunk here. They would have had Algeria. They would have also had the most of Morocco, except this little part of area that was controlled by Spain. They would have had Tunisia. They would have also had French Equatorial Africa. They would have also had Madagascar. And that's pretty much the area they have here. There's not a whole lot of actual resources. Well, I'll take that back. There were a decent amount of resources, and there was a decent amount of land. Obviously, France was really pretty powerful nation. And then in Asia, they would have had French into China, and that's kind of the extent of what they had in Asia. They didn't have much in Asia, not as much as the British would have had. And Britain would have also had Bernoulli too. Here, let me go back to that. There's a little area there. I kind of forgot about that. That was just kind of the boundaries they kind of made within their empire, even though they still ruled it over it all. They would have had some boundaries and stuff because of their cultures. That would have been, but anyway, that was kind of the extent of France and the French territories. So yeah, and then next would be the United States, which I would give a light blue to. The United States, they would have probably been fourth, I would say. And many Americans don't really think that America was an imperial power, but yes, they kind of were. So really, their territories would have been the Philippines, and they actually did have troops in the Philippines. However, the Philippines never became a state. Puerto Rico, that's still one of our territories that we have today. and Cuba really as well. Cuba had its own government, however we could put in troops when we thought that American interests were, and it really restricted what the Cuban international policies would have been. So really we had some strong hold over Cuba. However, Cuba still technically was an independent nation, but I still kind of consider us to have imperial control of Cuba. So really we didn't have much imperial control over much of anything. However, we were still a really powerful nation. Obviously, we were able to give a lot of money over to the Europeans, which is particularly the French and British. Tipped the balance later in 1917 when we declared war on Germany. That really helped tip the war there. So next, I would say probably, now this starts to get a little complicated now. I'll probably say Japan. In what color? I'll give Japan brown, I guess. And Japan's empire, pretty much is already given to us, which is kind of nice. But I'll probably say Japan because next I'm going to say is Russia. But because Japan was able to beat Russia in the Russo-Japanese War that happened in 1905, which was just like 9 years before World War I, and they beat them pretty badly, and it showed Europe that Japan was a rising power and something to really compete with, which it proved to become in World War II, which is later when they were able to gain Manchuria and many other parts of China and the Philippines and Southeast Asia. So Japan was a pretty big power. Next, like I said, I would say Russia, which I'm going to put in white because of the Russian winter, everything. And Russia is still kind of an imperial power because they had control of Central Asia here, and Kazakhstan and all the stands here. And then they would have had Finland and Poland and the Eastern European nations. So they were still kind of an imperial nation, and they were really pretty powerful. Not because many at this point would have dissed on Russia and called up Russia weak. However, they still were pretty powerful. They were really large land-wise. Next, I would say would be Italy, and then I'm going to give Italy like an orange. Italy is next. Italy was unified around the same time as Germany and proved to be really pretty powerful tool for the Allies, pretty powerful nation for the Allies in World War I, and they held a decent amount of territories, probably a little less than Germany, but they still held a decent amount of territory, and they're still pretty wealthy. However, they just weren't as powerful as the top 6 nations. So Libya, they had control of Libya and Africa, Eritrea. They tried to take control of Ethiopia in the 1880s, 1890s. However, the Ethiopians would have had enough measures to fight back the Italians, and the Italians were never able to take Ethiopia until Mussolini came in. Oh, I did forget one other territory that France would have had, which was French Somaliland right here. Just a little teeny tiny territory there, but the French did have that. So anyway, back to Italians, and really the Italians, the only other territory they would have had was Italian Somaliland right there. So that's kind of the extent of the Italian Empire. They didn't really have much, however they still were a decently powerful nation. Next, I would probably be Austria. Austria really, they kind of got beaten up a lot in World War I. They weren't really able to beat the Russians without the German support, and they were barely able to suppress the Serbians that were the ones that actually kind of caused World War I when a Serbian nationalist assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand. So and they were always constantly getting beat by Russia a lot of the time. In Italy, they were getting pretty beat by the Italians. Weren't able to make a big push in Italy, but however, they still were a decently powerful nation, still predominant in. Well, actually, I'll give that to the sick man of Europe, the Ottoman Empire. But they're severely weakened. They're one of the oldest that exist at this point because they were really powerful in the 1500s. However, they went over just sharp decline and gradually just lost territory for a long time until they pretty much just kind of had like the Palestine, which would be like Israel, and they just have like parts of Syria and the Arab lands, Turkey, and then just a teeny tiny bit of land that they still would have held that in the Balkans. So that's the Ottoman Empire right now. And then next, I'd probably say these are pretty kind of weaker nations. However, they still held territory. Would probably be the Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands had some territory, but they were pretty beaten up by the Germans pretty easily. And the territory that they would have held were the Dutch East Indies and in Suriname, that's pretty much what the Dutch would have held, and I don't know, they didn't have good control of the Dutch East Indies, especially in World War II when the Japanese were easily able to take Indonesia. World War II, and I mean this is still World War I. However, they weren't much more powerful now than they were during World War I. And another French territory I did forget to mention, French Guiana. They did have a little territory in South America. That's pretty much what the Europeans would have still held in South America at this point. And that was the territory that the Dutch would have held. Next, I would probably say before the Belgians, I would probably say Portugal, because I'll give Portugal the yellow color. Portugal, they were actually the first European nations to start gaining colonies. They started exploring in the early mid 1400s. They were able to find their route to India before any of the other European nations, which would have been around South Africa. They were able to actually claim South Africa before, but now they're reduced not too much. They're really a pretty weak nation. However, they still hold a decent amount of territory. They hold Angola, Mozambique, and what else? Oh yeah, they hold Guyana and a little bit Portuguese Timor right there, and that's pretty much the extent of what they would have held still at this point. So that would have been Portugal's territory, and they remained really pretty neutral in both World War I and World War II. So comparatively to the other European nations, we don't know how they would have fared because they never fought against any of them. They remained neutral during both world wars. So next, I'd probably say would be Belgium. I'll give a purple to them. Belgium, and really the only territory they would have held would have been Belgian Congo. That's it. That's the only colonial territory they would have held, which is a decent amount of land, and there was actually a lot of good resources there. However, Belgium was really pretty weak. The Germans were easily able to take Belgium, and the British had heavy influence in Belgium and kind of called the shots in many Belgian affairs. So next, probably the weakest nation out of any of the imperial nations would be Spain. Poor little Spain. They were so strong at one point. However, they are really weak at this point. They lost a lot of their territories that they would have had to the United States in the Spanish-American War in the very late 1800s, and they barely hold any territory anymore. They just hold a little part of Morocco here in Spanish Sahara, which is just pretty much desert. It's nothing. Oh, and Spanish Guinea. That's just a teeny tiny slit of land. That's the extent of what the imperial powers would have held. Now, if you don't already know, the kind of the sides in World War One at this point would have been Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Those three would have been the central powers. The Ottomans and the Austrians really were getting their butts kicked by the British and the Allied powers because they used a lot of the older, more traditional tactics of the time, and they had a lot of older technology that they never really caught up with the other nations, and they were pretty beaten by that. But Germany, really the leading power of the central powers, and like I said before, they were really pretty powerful. And then the allies would have consisted of Britain, France, the Russians, the Italians, Serbians. Oh, and also another central power that I would have that I forgot was Bulgaria. Bulgaria was another part of the central powers as well. However, they weren't in imperial power. They were in the Balkan area. But anyway, Italy would have been a part of the Allies. Let's see, the United States as well. The Netherlands and Belgium kind of were, since Germany attacked the Netherlands and Belgium. They would have attacked them. So, and also Japan would have joined the Allies as well, interestingly enough. And they tried to take the German territories. However, the British managed to take those areas. But yeah, this is what the map really would have looked like. A lot of it was under control of the Europeans, especially Africa. Africa is definitely the most colorful of them all. Asia is pretty colorful as well. And so yeah, if you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe, and I will try to continue to make map videos like this.